ASLA. I'd like to welcome you to Paul Macdonald's presentation for the 2022 Literature Symposium. When ASLA was first approached by the Foundation of Learning and Literacy to participate in the symposium, we were very, very excited. It was a great honour to be included and to be able to promote the role school libraries have in promoting literacy and reading within schools. When we were planning who to select for this symposium, we wanted to choose someone who would engage our core demographic of teacher librarians, but would also appeal to the wider education community, as well as possibly parents as well. Paul Macdonald is extremely knowledgeable about literature and the trends in literature, and we hope that through his presentation you'll be able to learn about the value and importance of high quality literature in supporting literacy development. A high quality text can be used to teach the mechanics and skills required to be literate, but can also encourage a love of reading and development of empathy. Quality text can address issues such as diversity, sustainability and wellbeing, while also engaging students in vocabulary development and extending their knowledge of text and literacy. The symposium aims to affirm the value of quality literature in the classroom, and through Paul's presentation, ASLA hopes that you walk away with a number of ideas of how picture books, novels and even graphic novels can be used in extending and enriching the students' experiences. Without further ado, please welcome Paul Macdonald.
My name is Paul Macdonald, and I'm very privileged to be asked by ASLA to present today to talk about the issue of rich literature, particularly the notion of advocating rich literature. My background is I was a teacher for 20 years, I'm a bookseller, and I work with hundreds of schools, building reading cultures, talking about quality texts, consulting on a whole range of different issues relating to literacy and literature. I'm going to share a PowerPoint with you today, and I'd love to be in the same room to have a conversation, but I do see this as a conversation starter. So what we are talking about today is the need to advocate rich literature, and I know I'm on the same page with you. What I'm particularly advocating is the need for teachers and educators to know the current market, and in knowing the current market to be more effective in promoting a reading culture in schools. If we're talking about the issue, we are on the same page, I'd imagine, regarding many different issues. To start off with, we agree that reading is good for you. Good starting point. I don't think there's going to be any arguments there. Interesting, I speak to teachers, to many students, and also to parents. I think you'd agree with me that reading for pleasure is the most important way to advance literacy attainment in children, and research has proven this time and time again. In speaking to parents, sometimes I receive some opposition saying, is it just about reading for pleasure? Should students only read certain texts? Should they study certain texts? Is there a place for just purely reading for pleasure? I strongly feel that reading for pleasure is the main objective. Promoting reading for pleasure is the main objective for teachers. Research time and time again also says that reading strengthens writing. We know that. We also agree that many other benefits of reading, and it's interesting to look at research, the unusual sort of correlation between reading and happiness and reading and physical health, the greater degree to empathise, and certainly the many benefits for mental health as well. As I said, we're on the same page. We agree that reading is good for you. I don't think there's going to be much disagreement as well about what is rich literature. And if we go to, say, the curriculum, globally, if we look at curriculum, quality literature is often described in terms of similar terms to the New South Wales Department of Education. But ultimately, rich literature is seen as that literature that extends and enriches. It offers complexities, complex vocabularies, figurative language, strong characterisation. The list is there for you. But I've particularly highlighted that quality literature should extend and enrich. Another starting point, I think, needs to be that if we're talking about advocating rich literature, we are, as teachers, going to be confronted with readers who are reluctant readers for many, many reasons. And the job of the teacher is to motivate, is to encourage, is to advocate, is to persuade the joys of reading, the joys of literature. Where I think we need to agree, though, is that we must have passionate advocacy of rich literature. There are so many distractions in today's society. Kids are spending a lot of time in front of their devices. Yes, they are reading, but how well are they reading? How deep are they reading? How resilient are they becoming as readers? I often refer to this Grant Snyder cartoon. We know that while the home has a greater influence on reading than schools, as educators, and certainly my position as a teacher was always that, I cannot control the home environment. So as an educator, my job was to promote, to advocate reading, the pleasures of reading. And my job as a teacher was to certainly help kids primarily discover books, fall in love with books, and identify as books, to connect with books. I would not be arrogant enough to assume that I can push a young student through all of those levels, obviously. And you may agree or disagree with those stages, but Grant Snyder's cartoon, for me, I've always thought the teacher must be an advocate, a passionate advocate, to help kids discover and fall in love with books, those first two stages. And interesting, teachers are integral, because a point of difference for myself is that sometimes I don't think it's the book that needs to extend and enrich, it's the teacher. Really, we can take many, many different sources, many different texts. The job of the teacher is to connect young readers with texts. The job of the teacher is to extend and enrich. And I think teachers do that even more than the book itself. Our starting point can be many, many different books. Teachers are at the centre of the whole equation. You cannot control the home environment, so the teacher becomes integral for me. If we're going to be passionate advocates of literature, and particularly rich literature, I think we need to have fun and to be advocates of more than just the canon, to actually promote the pleasures broadly of reading and to find quality within a whole range of genres, a whole range of texts. And certainly if we're going to advocate rich literature, we need to affirm along the way and we need to model it. When I speak to audiences, I often say, mention that my own reading background is I didn't have parents who were role models for reading. Great parents, but really school made a difference. I had very little contact with schools, with books until I went to school. I had no contact with libraries until I went to school. Schools made a difference, and that needs to be my position as a teacher, is what can the school, what can the teacher do? The teacher must affirm, the teacher must model. So if you're going to be an advocate, you need to be passionate about books and you need to know the current market. So that's really what I'm going to talk about in the next half hour. What is the current market? We cannot advocate rich literature if we do not know the market. Very hard for teachers who are very busy, very hard for librarians who are constantly asked to multitask and take on different duties. But for me, the book has to be at the centre of the equation. The current market. I talk about this. If you look at the books out there, books are a window to an age, and currently books certainly reflect our age. Whether we're talking about picture books, as the pictures there indicate, whether we're talking about novels, middle grade fiction, adult novels, certainly a lot of books represent diversity. We live in a world where we embrace diversity. Not everyone embraces diversity, but certainly we're seeing far more diverse cultures being represented, an expansion of identity, looking at more fluid gender representations. So we're talking about diversity right across the board. If we're looking at picture books specifically, we're getting representations of a range of families, kids from a range of cultures, kids whose identities may differ to our own. Certainly, particularly in light of the last few years with COVID, I know a lot of publishers are certainly looking at feel-good books, books that are positive, hopeful. If we're looking at, say, teen literature, the definition of teen literature often puts forward the notion that the ending must be hopeful, the ending must be positive. And I certainly agree with that. So a lot of books like this picture book here, but right across the market, including for adult market at the moment, wellbeing, positivity rules. Third main area at the moment in the current market, a lot of schools request lists, request support on this notion, is books that actually, discuss notions of sustainability. Kids have that meta language as well. When I talk to kids, they talk about sustainability as an issue in the books that they read. We need to be passionate about books, and knowing the current market is the first step. And the current market, I think, reflects diversity, well-being, sustainability. If we're going to know the market, another good starting point, and I work with a lot of beginning teachers, is to look at the Children's Book Council Awards. I won't spend time in these, but we're very lucky each year in Australia, since the mid-20th century, to have an awards. Currently, there's 35 books shortlisted each year in a range of categories. That's a good starting point. Those books have been deemed to be quality literature on a range of levels. What I have noticed over the last 20 years is a broadening of what is perceived to be rich literature. A lot of these books are more commercial. Kids find to be great reads. They're not just those books that teachers deem to be worthy, great vocabularies, but perhaps aren't page turners. And there's some great page turners that have been nominated this year and in the last few years for the Children's Book Council Awards. In front of you is the 6 books shortlisted for younger readers. There's some great books there. A most talked about book at the moment perhaps is Exit Through the Gift Shop. Came out last year. It's been shortlisted Book of the Year, which focuses on a young girl, age 12, who's been diagnosed with cancer. She's actually dying. Here's the thing, I'm dying, but don't panic. It's not the end of the world. I don't think that book would have been published 10 years ago, maybe not even 5 years ago. Books are more authentic, more rich in terms of their willingness to embrace the world we live and to reflect the world we live. I think it's a fascinating book. And that represents, I think, quality literature today. If we look at teen books, I know some of you out there, primary teachers, secondary teachers, primary librarians, secondary librarians, but I think it's a really strong list of for older readers this year as well. If we're looking at rich language, Girls and Boys Cars, outstanding. If we're going to be passionate about books, we need to know the current market. And I think the Children's Book Council Awards are a good starting point, but it's only a small part of the broader landscape. There's a lot to be passionate about picture books at the moment. And I have lots of discussion with teachers saying, can you construct a list, put together a list of quality picture books? What is a quality picture book? It's an interesting concept to look at. There are so many great picture books that have quality for a range of reasons. And if we go back to the syllabus, we're looking at vocabulary, we're looking at figurative language, but we're also talking about a capacity to enrich and extend broadly. And here's some books at the moment that I think do all of those things. Interesting, we've got picture books for high schools like The Tree of Ecstasy and Unbearable Sadness, which is beautiful, beautiful language. Very difficult book in that actually explores, it's written by and illustrated by Matt Otley, who's being very frank in his discussion of his own mental well-being, particularly discussing his bipolar disorder. What I like about books at the moment, there's a lot of rich literature exploring a range of cultures. I'll go and come back as a little girl who goes to see her grandmother in India, and she sees that life's different in different places. And it offers a whole range of complexities to discuss. Koala Ark is a gorgeous little picture book. While it's very simple, the language is beautiful, the rhythm is beautiful, it's rich on so many levels. As I said, there's so much to be passionate about picture books. And there's so much to be positive about. There's so many more Indigenous picture books that are on the market at the moment. The one that everyone's talking about at the moment is Open Your Heart to Country by Jasmine Seymour, who's one of the leading First Nations voices in terms of children's books. But a lot of these books rich in illustration, rich in language, rich in culture. When I talk about the need for books to extend and enrich, as I said, I think the teacher is the centre point. It's the teacher who extends and enriches. So you can take a range of books, I firmly believe that, and find richness, find quality. So when a teacher or a school rings, I do a lot of professional development where teachers say, I just want you to present books that are rich, that are quality. We might look at The Very Cranky Bear. You might think of that as being a quality text, as a rich text. But it depends what you do with that book. There's a lot of great repetition. It's a great construct for constructing picture books. Recently, I worked with a school that actually did a unit stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, looking at cranky picture books, which I thought was great. It was teachers that extended and enriched by taking a whole suite of books that were cranky. What does that mean? I guess issues-based picture books that actually forced conversations. A Forest, Sustainability. Never Forget About War. Room in Our Rock, a great reverse narrative that actually looks at the plight of refugees, displaced people. Found is a great one, looking at the stolen generation. So really it's the approach. What are you going to do with those books? And there's so many great books. I love it when schools are looking at different concepts, like the notion of what is a cranky picture book? What are some cranky picture books out there? I guess we're looking at persuasion, but I love the idea of taking books with attitude and exploring those with kids and finding the richness in those books. Easy reads. There's so much to be positive about easy reads at the moment. And interestingly, sometimes schools forget that a humorous book is rich. There's a lot you can do with a humorous book. Andy Griffiths, one of Australia's biggest selling children's authors of all time, has not won many awards. He's not often deemed to have written quality books. I think history will remember him as a writer of quality books, and certainly he has switched on so many kids to reading. David Williams, one of the biggest selling authors in the UK and the world, humour is his passport to promoting the pleasures of reading. And many, many books in the next few years. A lot of kids love his books in terms of narrative, in terms of encouraging to turn the page. There's richness there. A series I particularly like is the Our Story series. Maku, When Granny Came to Stay, are two of those. They're important in the current market. And again, how do you use these easy reads? Is it the book that extends and enriches? I think it's the teacher. So when looking at a series like these two series here, the Our Stories series and the Aussie Kids series for junior readers, stage 1, maybe stage 2 for some schools, but is perhaps grouping some books like this in talking about diversity. And diversity is such a broad topic for kids to understand that we are diverse on many, many different levels. Have a look at those. There's so much in those books to extend and enrich. There's so much richness in those books. If we jump up to middle grade, that's certainly the most talked about market at the moment. And there are so many great books being published in the middle grade market. What is the middle grade market? We're talking about readers, say 8+. You've got junior middle grade, you've got more senior middle grade. A lot of middle grade is on the cusp of primary and secondary. So readers upper primary, perhaps beginning secondary students as well. It's certainly the strongest market at the moment, and there is so much quality, again, on so many levels. Have a look at those covers there. I would argue that any of those books, some are more humorous. There's a range of genres there, fantasy and others. But there's so much to find, to extend and enrich in these books. Interesting if we look at middle grade, and indeed if we look at the children's market, social realism rules. 60–70%, I'd say, of the children's market deals with real issues, and kids want authentic. While there are still fantasy books like Big Magic in front of you, that's only a small part of the market at the moment. Kids want real life. And sometimes real life is not that neat. Hence, The Bravest Word deals with the young boy with anxiety. Augustin Jones, beautiful book, one of my favourites for the year, deals with a young kid who's actually lost an eye to illness. And while that sounds very depressing and there's some hardships along the way in that narrative, it's an absolutely positive book. Dear Greta is an angry book in a sense, and that's about the environment. It's about stepping up to have a voice. There is so much to extend and enrich in the middle grade market at the moment. Cop and Robber is certainly a middle grade book that crosses the primary and secondary market. It's a great run for upper primary. It's a great one for junior secondary. Tristan Banks is a master at offering moral dilemmas. While the narratives are quite simple, he writes page turners. There may not be the number of adjectives you would like, which we might normally equate with quality books. In Cop and Robber, we have a young kid who is caught. His mother is a cop. His father has a history of crime and is indeed a robber. And what the book does is explore that moral dilemma of being a child, working between two parents, seeing different lives, trying to decide which side of the fence they should be on. I do love Zadie Marr and the Dog That Chased the Moon. And that's actually a book that's got stories within stories. It's like a Pandora's box. It's very beautiful. That is rich in terms of its structure. With a book, when I work with teachers, I say, find the richness. If you read the book, what is rich about that? And that becomes the focus. For instance, if we look at Augustin Jones and The Bravest Word, both are about coming to terms with self. Both are very much identity-driven texts. Start with the book, but ultimately it's the teacher, equipped with many, many skills, who is able to extend and enrich. I'm not sure how many secondary teachers are out there, but certainly the YA, the young adult market, is strong. Again, social realism rules. When I speak to particularly primary parents or parents of young secondary students, parents are very concerned about the boundaries between the middle grade and teen fiction, and whether their kids should be exposed to some of the more adult issues that are being explored. If we look at something like The Brink by Holden Shepherd, which is coming out next month, I think, we do have a very raw portrait of older teen lives. Crime rules at the moment, romance rules, social realism definitely rules. Again, we have students wanting authentic. They don't want didactic. They want to be able to discuss issues. But what I love about YA is ultimately all of these books are hopeful. Sometimes you have to work harder to find the hope. But again, all of them offer richness, the teacher needs to stop and think, what do I want to do with this? What I love, particularly with teen fiction in the last few years, is teen fiction offers so many diverse narrative structures. So if we're looking at some books from the last few years, Between Us has 3 voices narrate the tale. Polyphony rules at the moment. We're seeing polyphony ruling in with middle school books as well, where the narrative voice is offered to more than one character. And research seems to suggest kids love polyphony. They mightn't use that term, but they love the notion of different points of view being presented. Time structures being played with, anachrony, flashbacks, flash forwards in books like The Protected, the rise of the verse novel. There are so many rich books that offer diverse narrative structures. I spent a lot of time in high schools working with kids looking at diverse narrative structures in their reading. Some of these books mightn't offer the rich language you might like. They mightn't offer other areas of complexity you might like, but if the focus is diverse narrative structures, there's a lot to take from some of those books. Graphic novels, again, when I speak to parents, a lot of parents definitely feel that graphic novels are not quality, do not offer quality. They're not examples of quality literature, and I totally disagree. Certainly they're great for promoting reading for pleasure, and again, find a focus, extend and enrich that focus. Here's some picture books, some graphic novels that are great for young kids. Know that research says 50% of graphic novel readers are male, 50% are female. There is a perception sometimes that boys read more graphic novels than girls. That's not the case. And certainly some other research highlights that the readers of graphic novels sometimes have a higher IQ than the average population. So there's so many good and complex choices that offer richness on many levels. If we're looking at secondary graphic novels, again, some of these really push boundaries as well. Heartstopper is possibly the biggest selling graphic novel in the world at the moment. Boy Meets Boy, but it's warm, it's delightful. The characters are gorgeous. So it's interesting to see schools opening up to a whole range of graphic novels and incorporating those within the their teaching practice. Still Alive is the most talked about graphic novel. It recently won the New South Wales Premier's Award and it's been nominated for Information Book of the Year. It's gritty, it's tough, and so it should be, because Safdar Ahmed, the author, is focusing on life in detention centres based on his own experience as an art teacher in the detention system. If we're looking at graphic novels, again, it's the teacher extends and enriches. It's the teacher who finds the richness and guides the students to explore that richness. These are two of my favourite graphic novels from the last few years. When Stars Are Scattered is a fantastic graphic novel that I think is great for upper primary, lower secondary. I've mentioned Still Life, but both of these books look at the plight of displaced persons. Still Alive is non-fiction, it's certainly much heavier, but When Stars Are Scattered is based on a real life. Non-fiction, while we often don't talk about non-fiction offering being rich literature, there's certainly the rise of the memoir being used in schools, the rise of real stories and kids wanting real stories. Even for a very junior level, Little People, Big Dreams, you can see the book on Pablo Picasso there. If that is your focus, there's a lot in non-fiction as well at the moment. They're bright, they're colourful, a lot of richness on many levels. Great to see so many Indigenous voices being represented in the market at the moment, as they should be. Classics, a lot to be passionate about classics, and they're part of the current market. Research said that during COVID, the readership of classics rose. probably because a lot of people had the classic on their bookshelves at home. Grandparents, particularly in the first year of lockdown, seem to be quite involved with their grandchildren's reading in terms of sending books and encouraging reading. But again, it's the teacher who finds the richness. I talk to a lot of students about the classic and the need for resilience, that sometimes the classic is a harder read. But I encourage kids to stay with it, to read 20, 30, 40 pages. It takes longer to fall into some of these stories. But again, what is the richness? I like a school recently I worked with that was looking at some classics. It was at stage 3 level, upper primary. And they were looking at why classics are still being read. So in a way, they framed that focus. They were exploring the use by dates and literature. Why do some books age and last? Why do some books, which are very popular, become forgotten very quickly? I love that notion of exploring the use by dates of literature and trying to ascertain, why does a book like The Secret Garden continue to be read many, many years after it's been written? The teacher finds the richness, and that richness lies in the framework of focus. Lots to be passionate about the adult market. Whenever I talk about the current landscape, I think it's really important to talk to teachers about what's out there as well, because we need to be readers right across the board. And as teachers, and hopefully as parents, we need to be role models for reading as well. Certainly crime fiction rules at the moment as well. What else rules? Real stories like love stories. Historical fiction also seems quite popular as well. Again, lots to be passionate about in the adult market. And I mention that because I do think we need, if we're going to be advocates of quality literature, we need to be passionate role models as well, and share with kids that we are readers. Some of these books are obviously not appropriate for kids, but we need to share our passion, share our enthusiasm for reading, and for kids to know that reading is part of our life. In closing, this is a quote I put up at some recent talks with parents, and it's been my most controversial slide that I put up. And recently a parent put a hand up and argued about this. The bottom line for me is, I think we need to encourage kids to read anything. Read the things they say are good for you and the things they claim are junk. You'll find what you need to read, just read. And I firmly believe that. We need to promote reading for pleasure. We need to encourage kids to see the link between reading and writing. They do become better writers generally if they enjoy the reading experience. In terms of advocating rich literature, I think the starting point needs to be, we need to advocate literature, and then the teacher needs to extend and enrich by finding the richness and focusing the kids on that richness. And I think there is a richness in most books. If we spend a lot of time being hung up on what is quality literature, I think we're missing the whole point. We need to immerse kids in literature. We need to help them discover books. We need to help them fall in love with books, push them on that journey, whatever that reading journey is. We all have a different book trail. And I think if we're distracted and we spend too much time saying, is this quality? I think the starting point is, there is quality in most books. We may agree that there's some that it's not a great deal of quality on many levels, but there is a lot of quality. But we've got to find that richness and extend and enrich. And certainly passionate. And if we're not feeling passionate about the books that we're talking about, I'd even go as far as to say we need to take it and really just encourage kids to see that we can be passionate about books. I've talked about a whole range of issues, and my goal today is just to start a conversation. And to go back to the drawing board, I know a lot of schools are actually discussing what is rich literature, what is quality literature. certainly we agree that we need to be great advocates, but rather than be distracted, I think we need to actually get the books out there, enjoy the books with kids, and find that focus, that framework that we want to find within the book, and share that and encourage the kids to be able to decode, to explore that framework within a book. I've left my details there. Hopefully there's one or two ideas for you to think about there. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Paul. We hope you're able to use something from Paul's presentation to start a conversation in your school, whether it be sharing one of the books mentioned with a colleague, or changing your program to include more picture books, or even finding a new book to read with your child, to enter into discussions on some of the social issues we're experiencing at this time. As you can see, there are a number of benefits to high quality text and reading for pleasure. As Paul's closing quote highlights, and it is often said, any reading is good reading. This presentation was a part of the 2022 Literature Symposium, so please take a moment to look at some of the other presentations that are on offer and available. There is an exciting agenda and many wonderful professional development opportunities available. On behalf of ASLA, I'd like to say thank you for taking the time to listen to Paul's presentation.